Hey there, and welcome back to 31 Days of Horror. We are on day 10, and today I watched Beau is Afraid. It stars Joaquin Phoenix, and Parker Posey's also in it, and Patti LuPone, and it is a different kind of horror movie. It's not horror in the traditional sense, but it is very anxiety inducing. And I can say up front that I did enjoy this movie. Going into it, however, I all I saw was previews, and before choosing it, and then when I was looking for movies to watch for my 31 days, I decided that I would give it a shot. I don't know if you can see in the background, that is another one of our dogs. That is Willow. She's a Chiweenie, if anybody is wondering. And so, anyway, I saw previews for this movie. I thought it looked intriguing back when I saw it, and I was just kind of waiting for an opportunity to check it out. And I wasn't disappointed. I will say, I do think that this is a difficult movie for people. I do think it's a hard movie to recommend. I think in order to recommend this movie to somebody, that you actually have to know that person pretty well. Because there is a lot of subject matter and there is a lot of visuals that may be disturbing for some people. And that being said, I'm not talking about gore. Now, that's the interesting thing because it is a horror movie, and normally you think if I'm saying that the visuals can be disturbing, that I would mean in the like gore sense, or even in that the sense of like The Ring, the video in the Ring or Ringu, however whichever you've seen. Those images are meant to disturb you. However, this is more, I think, disturbing. If you have a problem with male nudity, then this movie is not for you. Um, if you have issues with not necessarily blood and things, but kind of a hyper violent, anxious surroundings, if those are things that are triggering for you, then I wouldn't recommend this movie for you. Um, and I have to say that this movie is very psychologically driven. And that being said, there are some moments that are almost comical, not in a ha funny sort of way, but in a dramatically comedic kind of sense of when some things are just so over the top or so crazy that they end up being funny. It's that kind of movie. There's a lot of imagery, there's a lot of instances or dialogue that isn't necessarily, I don't mean bad in any sense, but it comes off as a little bit comedic because it's so completely absurd, but it matches with everything that you're seeing and you're experiencing. Um, the basic premise of the film is that there is a man who is struggling psychologically. We don't necessarily know if he's been diagnosed with something. We don't necessarily know exactly what he's struggling with. But when we first meet the main character, whose name is Beau, played by Joaquin Phoenix, he is seeing his therapist. He is struggling with a trip home that he is supposed to be taking to see his mother. Um, and then from that, we see his anxiety at going home, his trepidation about the whole thing, um, his his fear of his surroundings. And it's very interesting from there because then visually in the movie, we experience the movie, at least from my perspective. We experience the movie from Beau's perspective. So everyday things that are in the background that would normally be innocuous or would be relatively, you wouldn't even think about it, you wouldn't even notice it, people you'd walk by on the street and never take a second glance at, all become dangerous. And from the onset, as the viewer, you're given this very real sense of things are dangerous, things are a little bit absurd. We're not entirely sure if this is how things really are or if we're just seeing things from Beau's head. And we're kind of left in a limbo a little bit of knowing what's going on. And I know I spoke in another video about how you can give the audience very little information and make that part of the journey of watching a film or of a story, or you can give the audience very little information and then not resolve it in any way, shape, or form. And this is a striking difference between yesterday's Saint Maud and today's Beau is Afraid. And interestingly enough, the production company for Beau is Afraid was also A24. However, they weren't featured as prominently, so I'm not sure if they were more minor producers on it. I'm not necessarily sure if it was produced through the studio, but A24 was attached to this project, and so it's kind of nice to add to that, and it's a sharp contrast. So my criticism of St. Maud yesterday was that we were given very little information, absolutely no loose ends were tied up whatsoever, and you're just sort of left at the end of the movie going like, okay, so was anything that I saw real? Was anything that I saw not real? And it was just more frustrating than anything not to have a payoff for pretty much anything that we were introduced to. Alternately, now we're talking about Beau is Afraid, we are given very little actual information that's coming from anything other than Beau's experience. We don't see anything from anyone else's perspective. It's all following Beau. And so that leaves you with a lot of questions of when he's experiencing things and things that are, like I said, almost comedic because they're absurd. Are those real things, or are they just things that Beau is imagining? And along that same vein, when we do start getting some closure in the movie, when things do start wrapping up, then we're left with a lot more questions, and the end is the end is ambiguous, and I think it's more ambiguous based on your own perspective of the movie, where you're coming from watching it. But it worked. It worked a lot. The ambiguousness works a lot better. And I think if you're a person who enjoys horror, that's a big one, and somebody who may have their own sort of mental health struggles, if that's something that you're comfortable kind of exploring, I think that this is a very good entry. Sorry, mosquito. I think this is a very good entry into something because it's not straight up, there's no slashers killing people. It's not, really horrific imagery, because I know there's been some good movies that came out from a psychological point of view that do rely on some horror imagery, and that can be incredibly powerful. And it can really drive stories. The imagery in this film was a lot more realistic, so it was different. It was very difficult to tell if things were being imagined or exaggerated, or if they were in fact reality, and that this man is experiencing this absurd, crazy, journey that he's going on. And I think if you struggle yourself with mental health issues, or if you have somebody that you care about who struggles with mental health issues, I think this movie does a really good job of creating the horror, creating the scare, by making you question your own experiences. If you yourself struggle, if your perception of reality could be skewed enough to create this horrifying reality for you, or it's really scary to think, if you care about somebody who struggles with mental health, it is kind of it brings on the scare of hoping that they are never subjected to, or they never experience that same kind of terror or horror of not being able to discern reality from I don't want to say fantasy, but from what your brain is telling you is reality. And I think that's a very real fear that I think a lot of people are now a lot more comfortable expressing, and we're seeing a lot of that through social media, is that people are really afraid that their own brain is lying to them. And I think it's an odd way to look at it, but I think films like this are a really good way of ending mental health stigma, because his mental health isn't really the issue here. And a lot of the subject matter that's addressed in this movie, a lot of it has to do with our relationships with other people, our relationships with parents, about guilt. Um, and I think there's a lot to be said about there's an entire generation of people right now who have this very strong sense of guilt when it comes to their parents. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, it's because a lot of us were raised. When I say a lot of us, I'm not necessarily counting myself in that. I'm just as part of the populace. A lot of people were raised by people who were very much the me generation, and by association there are a lot of people who have this great sense of guilt of not having done right by their parents in some way, or having failed them greatly because they're not this pinnacle of um, what their parents were hoping for a child. And I think as a result of knowing that that is something very real with a lot of people, that a lot of people struggle with, I think there are then a lot of us who are trying very hard not to pass on those same things to our own children. And I think a lot of those themes were very much expressed in this movie. And so it's kind of a cool exploration of generational trauma, childhood trauma, parental expectations, dealing with guilt along with mental health struggles, and how those can skew your reality, or how those can very much make you view the world in a much more paranoid or sad or anxious ridden sense than other people, and they may not even realize that. And I think films like this do such a good job, I think, of expressing what actually goes on in a lot of people's heads, or how people perceive different things and why. And I think the more mainstream that we can make those things, the more empathetic people who don't experience this, or who don't have experience with these kinds of things, are going to be. And I also think that they're going to um, it's going to encourage better resources. And the neat thing is, horror can express a lot of those things in a better way than just trying to explain it to somebody, because for a lot of people, they don't really think something is serious until it's terrifying. And so it's cool. Horror gives you a way of expressing um, different life experiences in ways that even people who have no concept of those aspects of life can understand them. Because if you create terror, or you create horror, you create a scare, that is a universal feeling that everybody can understand. And if you can generate a fear of something that someone's not afflicted with, then it gives a better understanding of the people who are afflicted with those things. And I think that can be really beautiful. Um, so I enjoyed Beau is Afraid. I do have to say, the ending lacked a little bit for me. But that's just personal preference. I don't necessarily think it was a bad ending. It's just not really it's not how I would have preferred the film itself to wrap up. But that being said, I can't sit here and say, well, if they just did this, this, and this, it would have been perfect. I don't have a better suggestion of how they could have done it. I just know that for me, it didn't entirely work. Um, but with that, I'm not saying it was bad in any sense. I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was shot incredibly well. I thought there are so many Easter eggs and different things that you can see in the backgrounds of shots. And oh, and there's our third dog. That is Miss Buffy, our three-legged Pekingese back there. She just turned 12 years old this past month, and so that's our crew. um, anyway, I definitely recommend this movie. On that note too, it is also a bit of a long movie, and it can feel like a bit of a daunting task. So I do recommend this when you have a chunk of time that you can sit down to dedicate to it. where you're not really having interruptions, and you can pay attention to the movie because, like I said, the visuals are very important. There's a lot of things that you can see in the background, and I caught myself actually rewinding the film a couple of times, being like, "Wait a minute, did I really see what I thought I saw there?" And then rewinding and being like, "I did see what I thought I saw there." And I would really be interested to hear what you guys think. This isn't, and that being said, it does have to do with mental health, but we're not talking like a Shutter Island type horror here. This is definitely a lot more. Um, this is not necessarily a man having a psychotic break. It's a man who is afflicted with trauma and mental health, issues, anxiety and things like that, and how he's faring with that, and then going through this absurd series of events. So check it out. And I would love to hear what you have to think about it. I would love to have a conversation with you. So feel free to, drop a comment below. And if you've seen other movies that you think I might be interested in checking out, we've still got 21 more days of this month to go, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. So yeah, overall, Beau was Afraid. I'd give it 4.5 stars. We're almost to 5 with this one, I think. So have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow.